You don't belong in first-class sport. That seat's for people who actually earned it. When Captain Derek Martinez announced final descent into LAX that Tuesday evening, he thought he was completing routine Flight 847. He had no idea he was crash-landing his entire career and taking his crew down with him. It started with a smirk directed at a passenger in designer sneakers and ended with the most expensive silence in aviation history. They thought the man in 1A was just another problem they could laugh at behind the galley curtain. They didn't know that Devon Alexander hadn't just bought a ticket. He had just bought their airline, and he was taking notes on every word, every sneer, every moment of disrespect. This is the story of how arrogance met accountability at 30,000 feet and why you should never judge someone by their hoodie. Before we dive in, drop your city in the comments. Let's see where this story travels around the world. And if workplace justice gets your blood pumping the way it does mine, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. You're going to want to see how this lands. Now let's rewind to where it all started. The storm system over Chicago O'Hare was relentless, turning what should have been a routine Tuesday evening into a logistical nightmare. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, and rain hammered the terminal windows like bullets. Inside CloudLine Airways' Gate B, 17 passengers huddled in uncomfortable plastic chairs, their flights delayed by hours. Flight 847 to Los Angeles had been pushed back 3 times. The gate area buzzed with frustrated energy. Business travelers checking watches, families with crying children, and the kind of travel-weary tension that turns ordinary people into potential powder kegs. Devon Alexander sat quietly in the corner, away from the chaos. At 42, he had learned to find calm in storms, both literal and metaphorical. He wore a charcoal cashmere hoodie that cost more than most people's rent premium joggers that looked casual but screamed luxury to anyone who knew brands and limited edition sneakers that were impossible to get unless you had serious connections. His worn leather messenger bag sat beside him, stuffed with documents that would reshape an entire industry if anyone bothered to look. But nobody looked. They saw a black man in a hoodie and made their assumptions. Devon's phone buzzed. A text from his legal team acquisition finalized. CloudLine Airways officially yours as of midnight. Congratulations, boss. He had spent 3 years orchestrating this purchase through shell companies and private equity maneuvers. As of 12 hours ago, he owned the airline he was about to fly. The irony wasn't lost on him. Ladies and gentlemen, the gate agent announced Flight 847 is now ready for boarding. First class and CloudLine Elite members, please approach the gate. Devon stood stretching, muscles stiff from a week of brutal negotiations in London. He'd been in boardrooms for 14 hours a day, finalizing deals that would revolutionize air travel. All he wanted now was to get home to Los Angeles, sleep in his own bed, and start planning the changes that would make CloudLine Airways the most passenger-friendly airline in America. He had no idea he was about to get a masterclass in exactly why those changes were necessary. The jetway was packed with impatient passengers shuffling toward the aircraft. Devon moved with quiet confidence, his boarding pass ready on his phone. First class, seat 1A. He'd paid full fare in cash, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to experience his airline exactly as his customers did. The Boeing 777 was CloudLine's flagship aircraft, and this particular plane was one of their newest. As Devon stepped through the aircraft door, he was greeted by the familiar smell of leather seats and that peculiar combination of cleaning products and recycled air that defined every commercial flight. Standing just inside the cabin door, adjusting her scarf with practiced precision, was Victoria Sterling. At 38, Victoria had been flying with CloudLine for 15 years. She had seen every type of passenger imaginable, and she had developed her own classification system. The old money types who slept the entire flight. The nouveau riche who needed everyone to know they were important. The business climbers who drank too much and flirted poorly. And then there were the upgrades. The ones who didn't belong, who had somehow stumbled into her cabin through Miles' luck or deception. Victoria prided herself on spotting the upgrades immediately, and when she saw Devon Alexander walk through her cabin door, every instinct she had screamed problem passenger. He didn't look like her usual first-class clientele. No tailored suit, no expensive watch catching the light, no air of corporate authority. Just a tall, broad-shouldered black man in casual clothes carrying a beat-up bag and looking tired. She'd dealt with his type before, lottery winners trying to live the dream, athletes thinking their fame bought them respect. Tech bros who'd made a quick fortune and didn't understand airline hierarchy. They all made the same mistake. They thought a first-class ticket made them first-class people. Victoria Sterling knew better, and she was about to teach this particular passenger a lesson about knowing his place. "Welcome aboard CloudLine 847. Victoria said, her voice automatically shifting to that trained flight attendant tone, bright, professional, and completely hollow. Her eyes flicked over Devon dismissively the way someone might glance at a piece of furniture they were considering throwing away. "Economy boarding is that way," she continued, pointing toward the back of the aircraft with a manicured finger. Her gesture wasn't the open palm direction they'd taught her in training. It was sharp, dismissive, meant to establish distance. Devon paused, blinking. After 18 hours of travel, countless meetings, and the stress of finalizing the biggest acquisition of his career, this wasn't what he needed. But he'd been here before. Different plane, different flight attendant, same assumptions. "I'm in first class," he said quietly, his voice deep and calm. He held up his phone, displaying the digital boarding pass clearly. "Seat 1A." Victoria snatched the phone from his hand without asking permission, squinting at the screen as if she were examining evidence of a crime. She swiped unnecessarily, her thumb leaving smudges on the glass, taking longer than needed to verify what was already obvious. "Right," she said finally, the word dripping with skepticism. "1A is over there." She pointed again, this time with even less courtesy, her body language screaming that she was doing him a massive favor by allowing him to exist in her space. "Thank you," Devon replied, retrieving his phone. His fingers brushed hers as he took it back, and Victoria jerked her hand away as if he might contaminate her. Devon moved toward seat 1A and began lifting his messenger bag toward the overhead bin. It was heavy, filled with legal documents, financial reports, and a laptop containing the future plans for the company these people worked for. The bag had traveled with him on hundreds of flights. He knew exactly which bins it fit and how much space it required, and that it met every size regulation CloudLine had. "Excuse me," Victoria's voice cracked like a whip across the cabin. Devon froze the bag halfway up. Several other passengers looked over, sensing drama brewing. "Yes," he said, his voice still even. "That bin is reserved for standard carry-ons," Victoria announced loud enough for everyone in first class to hear. "That bag looks oversized. You'll need to gate check it." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Devon had flown this exact route monthly for the past 2 years. His bag fit perfectly in every overhead bin CloudLine had. But Victoria wasn't interested in regulations or facts. She was interested in establishing control. "It fits fine," Devon said, continuing to lift the bag. "I've flown with this bag dozens of times." "Well, not on my flight," Victoria snapped, stepping into the aisle with her hands on her hips. The movement was aggressive, territorial, like a guard dog marking boundaries. "The bins are full." Devon looked at the completely empty bin above his seat. He looked back at Victoria. Senator James Walsh in seat 2. A glanced up from his newspaper, his eyebrows raised in amusement at the obvious absurdity of the situation. "The bin is empty," Devon observed, his tone still controlled. "It's reserved." Victoria lied again, doubling down. Her voice was getting sharper, more defensive. "For the pilot's gear." This was petty power at its most naked. She wanted Devon to know that just because he'd bought a ticket didn't mean he belonged in her club. The first-class cabin was her domain, and she would decide who felt welcome and who felt tolerated. Devon took a slow breath. He was too tired for this performance, too focused on the bigger picture to get dragged into a battle with someone who had no idea who she was really fighting. "The pilot's gear usually goes in the crew closet, doesn't it?" he said, his voice carrying just enough authority to make Victoria's face flush. She hated being corrected, especially by someone she'd already categorized as beneath her station. But what she hated more was being corrected accurately in front of witnesses who could see her lies crumbling in real time. Victoria stepped closer, invading Devon's personal space in a move calculated to intimidate. At 5'8", she wasn't tall, but she used her position and her uniform like armor. "Sir," she said, her voice now ice cold, "if you continue to argue with crew instructions, I can have you removed from this aircraft before we even push back from the gate. Do you want to fly today or not?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the first-class cabin had gone quiet. Senator Walsh was openly staring now. A woman in 3F had paused mid-conversation with her seatmate. Even the passengers still boarding had slowed their movement, sensing the tension. Devon looked at Victoria's name tag. Victoria Sterling, Senior Flight Attendant. He committed the name to memory. He studied her face. The tight smile, the cold eyes, the way she held her body like a weapon aimed at him. "Fine," Devon said quietly. "I'll keep it under the seat. It won't fit properly during takeoff," Victoria countered immediately, not willing to let him have even this small victory. "Federal regulations." "Then put it in the crew closet," Devon suggested, his voice hardening slightly. Victoria huffed, grabbing the bag more aggressively than necessary. "Fine, but if it gets damaged, don't come crying to me about compensation." She dragged it toward the front galley, making sure her movements were loud enough to draw attention, slamming the closet door with unnecessary force. Devon sat down in 1A, buckling his seatbelt with deliberate calm. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself the way he'd learned in meditation classes his grandmother had insisted he take as a child. "Don't let them steal your peace," she used to tell him. "People who try to make you small are already small themselves. Just remember who you are." Devon Alexander knew exactly who he was. He was the man who had just spent 72 hours finalizing the acquisition of CloudLine Airways. He was the CEO who had built Meridian Holdings from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar empire. He was the person who, as of midnight last night, owned every rivet in this aircraft. But more than that, he was a man who had learned that real power wasn't about making people feel small. It was about lifting people up, creating opportunities, and building something better than what came before. He opened his eyes and looked around the cabin. Victoria was back at her station, whispering something to a younger flight attendant that made both of them glance in his direction and snicker. Captain Derek Martinez had emerged from the cockpit, a silver-haired man with the kind of swagger that came from 30 years of being treated like a god every time he put on his uniform. Devon reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened his secure email app and began typing a draft message. The subject line read, "Asset Review. Flight 847. Personnel Evaluation." He wasn't just a passenger on this flight. He was conducting the most important performance review of these people's careers, and they had no idea the test had already begun. 10 minutes passed. The aircraft was fully boarded, doors sealed, and the familiar sound of engines spooling up filled the cabin. Devon waited in 1A, watching the pre-flight service routine unfold around him like a carefully choreographed dance of exclusion. Victoria moved through the first-class cabin with practiced efficiency, her smile bright and warm for every passenger except one. She served champagne to Senator Walsh in 2A, Dom Perignon, with a genuine laugh at something he whispered. She offered a hot towel to the tech executive in 3F, asking about his preference for lemon or lavender scent. She checked on the elderly couple in 4D and 4E, ensuring they had pillows and that their seatbelts were comfortable. She walked past Devon 3 times without making eye contact. Emma Rodriguez, the junior flight attendant, noticed. At 24, Emma was new enough to the job that the casual cruelty hadn't become routine yet. She kept glancing at Devon's empty water glass, then at Victoria, clearly conflicted about what to do. "Excuse me," Devon said quietly as Emma passed his row for the fourth time. "Could I get some water?" Emma stopped looking genuinely apologetic. She glanced toward the galley where Victoria was busy arranging amenity kits. "Of course, sir. Let me just—" "Emma." Victoria's voice cut across the cabin like a blade. "We're about to push back. Service starts once we're airborne." Emma looked back at Devon, her expression torn. "I'm sorry, sir. We're about to—" "You just served the gentleman across the aisle," Devon pointed out, gesturing to Senator Walsh, who was already halfway through his champagne. His voice remained calm, but there was an edge of steel in it that made Emma shift nervously. "That was prearranged." Emma stammered the lie obvious in her voice. "Special dietary requirements." Devon looked at the senator's champagne glass, then back at Emma. "It's just water." Before Emma could respond, Captain Derek Martinez emerged from the cockpit. At 48, Derek had the kind of presence that filled a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that looked like it belonged in a commercial for expensive cologne. His uniform was immaculate, his jaw square, his movements carrying the confident swagger of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He surveyed the first-class cabin like a general inspecting troops, his gaze lingering on Devon with undisguised annoyance. "Sit tight, sport," Derek called out, his voice booming across the cabin. "We'll get you your hydration once the seatbelt sign is off. Let the crew do their job. Sport." Devon's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He hadn't been called sport since he was an intern 20 years ago, fetching coffee for executives who saw him as temporary help rather than future competition. Devon looked up at the captain, his expression unreadable. "I'm simply requesting service that appears to be standard in this cabin, Captain." Derek stepped fully into the aisle, using his height and position to tower over Devon's seat. His smile was patronizing, the kind of expression adults use with children who don't understand adult rules. "Look, Buddy Derek," said his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure other passengers could hear. "I don't know how you got the miles for this seat, but up here we value patience and respect for procedures. Don't make yourself a problem or we'll turn this bird around before we even leave Chicago. Understood?" The cabin had gone completely silent. Senator Walsh lowered his newspaper entirely, watching the confrontation with fascination. The tech executive in 3F had paused mid-email to stare. Even passengers in economy who could see through the curtain were craning their necks. Devon held the captain's gaze without blinking. In boardrooms across 3 continents, Devon Alexander was known as the Silencer, not because he shouted or threatened, but because he had mastered the art of controlled stillness. He could make powerful people uncomfortable simply by looking at them with complete, unshakable calm. "Understood, Captain Martinez," Devon said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made Derek's confident expression falter for just a moment. Derek recovered quickly, chuckling and patting Devon's shoulder with just a little too much force. "Good man," he said, walking back toward the cockpit with exaggerated swagger. He winked at Victoria as he passed. "Keep an eye on him, Victoria. Like a hawk." "Captain," Victoria replied, loud enough for Devon to hear clearly. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and the safety video began playing on overhead screens, Devon pulled out his phone one last time before switching it to airplane mode. He opened his secure email application and began composing a new draft. The subject line read, "Asset Review, Flight 847. Immediate personnel action required." The body of the email was brief, Elena. "Prepare termination packages for Captain Derek Martinez and Senior Flight Attendant Victoria Sterling, effective upon landing LAX. Cause violation of company anti-discrimination policies, failure to provide standard service and conduct unbecoming CloudLine Airways employees. Also, prepare breathalyzer kit for Captain Martinez." Observed potential alcohol consumption during pre-flight duties. Full documentation to follow. D.A. Devon wasn't just a passenger being mistreated. He was the owner of this airline, watching his employees destroy the reputation he was planning to rebuild. Every sneer, every dismissive gesture, every moment of casual cruelty was being documented not by an angry customer, but by their new boss. As the engines roared to life and Flight 847 began its taxi toward the runway, Devon leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The real turbulence was still ahead, but the storm had already begun. Victoria and Derek just didn't know they were standing in the eye of a hurricane that was about to change their lives forever. In 6 hours, when they landed in Los Angeles, they would discover that underestimating the man in the hoodie was the most expensive mistake they'd ever made. As Flight 847 climbed toward cruising altitude, the cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a cross-country flight. But in Seat 3, F-Tech blogger Michael Chen was anything but settled. He'd been watching the interaction between the crew and the passenger in 1A with growing disbelief, and his journalist instincts were screaming that he was witnessing something significant. Michael had built his reputation on exposing corporate misconduct through viral social media campaigns. His Twitter account at TechWhistle had 400,000 followers who trusted him to call out injustice when he saw it. And what he had just witnessed was textbook discrimination playing out in real time at 30,000 feet. He pulled out his phone and began typing a thread currently on at CloudLine Air Flight 847, and watching the most blatant passenger discrimination I've ever seen. Black passenger in first class being treated like a criminal while white passengers get champagne service. This is 2024, people. 1/12, Michael hit tweet, and immediately began recording a subtle video, his phone angled to capture Devon's row without being obvious about it. The thread began gaining traction immediately. Retweets, comments, and quote tweets from people sharing their own airline horror stories. Meanwhile, Devon had his laptop open, taking advantage of the aircraft's Wi-Fi to access CloudLine's internal systems. As the majority owner through Meridian Holdings, he had administrative access to everything: personnel files, complaint records, financial reports, and operational data. He typed Sterling Victoria into the employee database search bar. The file that populated made for disturbing reading. Victoria Sterling, 15 years of service, multiple commendations for maintaining cabin standards, but also 6 passenger complaints in the past 2 years alone. The complaints were eerily similar. Passengers reporting feeling unwelcome, being denied standard services, or being treated with obvious hostility based on their appearance or perceived social status. What was most disturbing was that all 6 complaints had been dismissed by management as unruly passenger behavior or misunderstandings. The base manager who had signed off on these dismissals was Paul Rodriguez, a name Devon made note of for future investigation. He pulled up Derek Martinez's file next. 30 years with CloudLine, an exemplary safety record, but 2 incidents in the past 5 years involving off-duty conduct that had been quietly resolved through union negotiations. The details were vague, but Devon's experience reading between corporate lines told him everything he needed to know. His phone buzzed with a notification. Michael Chen had tagged CloudLine Airways in a viral Twitter thread that was approaching 50,000 views. The hashtag CloudLine Crisis was starting to trend. Devon glanced across the aisle at Michael, who gave him a subtle nod of solidarity. An alliance was forming between passengers who had witnessed the same injustice, united by the simple recognition that what they had seen was wrong. From the galley, Victoria's voice carried clearly as she spoke to Emma Keep, watching him. These upgrade passengers always think they can cause problems and get compensation. Document everything, so when he complains later, we have our story straight. She had no idea that every word was being documented by someone far more powerful than a complaint could ever be. Devon was building a case not just against Victoria and Derek, but against the entire culture that had allowed their behavior to flourish unchecked for years. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign chimed off. Devon closed his laptop and settled back in his seat. The hardest part was over. He had all the evidence he needed. Now he just had to wait for the landing when accountability would finally catch up with people who had never faced consequences for their actions. But first, he was going to watch them make it even worse. The familiar chime of the seatbelt sign turning off was like a starting bell for Victoria Sterling. She moved with practiced efficiency, transforming the first-class galley into a stage for her particular brand of hospitality theater. Warm, attentive service for those who deserved it and calculated neglect for those who didn't. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice came over the intercom, honeyed and professional. "We're now at cruising altitude. I'll be coming through the cabin shortly to take your meal selections. Today we're featuring herb-crusted sea bass with lemon risotto, braised short ribs with red wine reduction, or our signature pasta primavera." Devon listened from 1A, noting how her tone could sound so genuinely warm to those who didn't know what came next. He opened his laptop again, pulling up the flight manifest and meal inventory. CloudLine's first-class service was supposed to guarantee meal choice for every passenger. They loaded extras specifically to ensure availability. Victoria began her rounds at row 4, working her way forward with theatrical precision. The elderly couple received her full attention. Explanations of each dish wine pairing suggestions, warm smiles, and gentle touches on shoulders. The tech executive in 3F got insider information about meal preparation and a promise to let the chef know if he needed any modifications. Senator Walsh received Victoria at her most charming. "Senator, such a pleasure to have you aboard again. The sea bass is exceptional today, came in fresh this morning. Or perhaps the short ribs I remember you enjoyed those last time. The sea bass sounds perfect, Victoria, and thank you for remembering. Of course, Senator. It's all about taking care of our valued passengers." Devon watched this performance with the eye of someone who had built his career on reading people and understanding organizational dynamics. Victoria wasn't just doing her job. She was putting on a show of exclusion, making sure everyone in the cabin could see the difference between how her kind of passenger was treated versus the interloper in 1A. She approached Devon's row with her expression shifting like a mask being changed. The warm smile disappeared, replaced by professional coldness. "Meal choice," she said abruptly, not looking at him, her voice flat and transactional. "What are the options?" Devon asked, though he had heard her announce them moments before. "Beef or pasta?" Victoria replied curtly. Devon glanced at the menu card in his seat pocket, then back at Victoria. "I believe the announcement mentioned sea bass." "We're out," she said immediately, her lie delivered with practiced confidence. "You haven't served anyone else yet," Devon observed calmly, gesturing toward the other passengers who were still receiving their menus and wine selections. Victoria's jaw tightened. This wasn't supposed to be a negotiation. Passengers like Devon were supposed to accept whatever they were offered and be grateful for it. "The pilot and crew get first choice," she said, her voice getting sharper. "Then our CloudLine Elite members. Then our full-fare passengers, by the time we get to last-minute upgrades." She shrugged the gesture, dripping with fake sympathy. "We run out of premium selections. Beef or pasta." It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting, creating a hierarchy of service that sounded official but was completely fabricated. Devon had helped write CloudLine's service standards himself as part of his due diligence. Every first-class passenger was guaranteed meal choice regardless of how they obtained their seat. "I'll have the beef," Devon said, his voice still controlled. "Fine," Victoria said, making a note with exaggerated motions as if accommodating him was a tremendous burden. She moved away without another word, but Devon could hear her whispering to Emma near the galley classic upgrade behavior. "They always want what they can't have. Good thing we know how to handle these situations." 30 minutes later, Emma approached with Devon's meal tray. The young woman looked genuinely apologetic as she set up his tray table with careful precision. "Here you go, sir." "The beef short ribs," she said softly, placing the linen napkin with gentle care. Devon looked at the presentation and immediately understood this was sabotage disguised as service. The plate was sloppy. Sauce smeared on the rim, the vegetables clearly reheated rather than fresh, and the bread roll was rock-hard, obviously stale. But what caught his attention was the wine glass sitting beside the plate. It was chipped, not damaged in transport or through accident. The chip was clean and obvious, the kind of defect that would never make it past CloudLine's quality standards unless someone had deliberately selected it. "Thank you, Emma," Devon said, his voice kind. The young woman wasn't the problem here. She was following orders from someone who was using her as a weapon. "Could I get a glass of the Cabernet?" "Of course, sir," Emma replied, reaching for the wine bottle on her service cart, with obvious relief at his polite tone. As Emma began to pour, the aircraft hit a pocket of minor turbulence, nothing more than the gentle jolt that was common on any flight. But as the plane shifted slightly, Emma stumbled, her hand jerking. A splash of red wine arced through the air, landing squarely on the sleeve of Devon's gray cashmere hoodie. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Emma gasped, immediately grabbing napkins from her cart. "Sir, I am so incredibly sorry. The turbulence just—" "It's okay, Emma," Devon said calmly, holding up his hand to stop her frantic apologizing. "It was the turbulence. These things happen. Don't worry about it." No, let me get some club soda. I can get that out." "Emma." Victoria's voice cracked across the cabin like a whip, making several passengers look up from their meals. She marched over from the galley, her expression thunderous. "What did you do?" "I spilled wine," Emma said, her voice small and ashamed. "It was an accident." The plane hit turbulence, and Great Victoria interrupted, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Just great. Now we have to fill out an incident report because he's going to demand dry cleaning compensation." She turned to Devon, speaking about him as if he weren't sitting right there. "Look, we're not responsible for turbulence spills. It's in the fine print of your ticket, so don't think you're getting some kind of payout from this." Devon slowly wiped the wine from his hands with his napkin. He looked at Victoria with the kind of terrifying calm that had made boardroom opponents fold without him raising his voice. "I didn't ask for compensation." "Ms. Sterling," he said quietly. Emma apologized sincerely. "I accepted her apology. It was clearly an accident. The only person making this into an issue is you." Victoria bristled. She was used to passengers who either yelled, giving her the moral high ground, or who cowered under her authority. Devon's articulate calm was unsettling, like being challenged by someone who understood exactly what game she was playing. "I'm just stating company policy," she snapped. "And since you're already causing a mess and disrupting service, maybe you should just finish your meal quietly and try to avoid any more incidents." She started to turn away, then stopped, her eyes catching something on Devon's laptop screen. He had minimized the personnel files, but the CloudLine Airways corporate wallpaper was clearly visible, the standard background for all company-issued devices. "Why do you have our company logo on your computer?" she asked, suspicion dripping from her voice. "Do you work for CloudLine?" This was the moment Devon could have ended everything. He could have revealed his identity, shown his credentials, and watched Victoria's world crumble in real time. But he wanted to see how deep this went, wanted to understand exactly what kind of culture had been allowed to fester in his new company. "I'm in the industry," Devon said vaguely. Victoria laughed, a short, harsh sound that made other passengers look over uncomfortably. "Let me guess. Baggage handler? Maybe ticket agent at some regional airport?" "Something like that," Devon replied. Victoria's smile was cruel now. Victoria's. "Well, stick to throwing bags around sport. Leave the flying to the professionals. She walked back toward the galley, her voice carrying clearly as she spoke to Captain Martinez, who had emerged for his usual mid-flight cabin walk. Guy in 1A is a total pain. She complained loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. Claims he works in the industry, probably scans boarding passes in Omaha or something. Classic wannabe behavior. Derek laughed, the sound booming across the first-class cabin. These upgrade passengers always have delusions of grandeur. Pour me a scotch, will you? I'm off duty in 4 hours, and I need something to take the edge off these landing jitters. Devon's blood went cold. He carefully set down his fork and looked toward the galley where Victoria was indeed reaching for a bottle of scotch, pouring it into a plastic cup with casual familiarity. FAA regulations were crystal clear. No alcohol consumption within 8 hours of flight duty, and absolutely no alcohol during flight operations. What Devon was witnessing wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially criminal, and it put every passenger on the aircraft at risk. He quietly unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, walking toward the lavatory that was located directly adjacent to the galley. As he passed the curtain separating the passenger cabin from the service area, he saw it clearly. Captain Derek Martinez was leaning against the galley counter, a plastic cup of amber liquid in his hand, taking a casual sip as if he were at a bar rather than in command of a commercial aircraft carrying 300 people. Devon stepped into the galley area, his movement deliberate and quiet. The space was cramped, designed for efficiency rather than confrontation, but sometimes the most important conversations happen in the smallest spaces. Derek jumped when he saw Devon hastily moving the plastic cup behind his back like a teenager caught with beer at a house party. Victoria spun around, her face immediately shifting to outrage. "You cannot be in here!" she shrieked, her voice pitched high enough to carry into the passenger cabin. "This is a restricted area. The lavatory is that way." Devon ignored her completely, his focus entirely on Captain Martinez. The smell of alcohol was faint but unmistakable. The sharp, distinctive scent of expensive scotch that couldn't be masked by mints or coffee. Captain Devon said, his voice quiet, but carrying absolute authority. "I hope that's apple juice in your hand." Derek's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Surprise, anger, fear, and finally settling on indignant fury. He stepped forward, using his height and the confined space to try to intimidate Devon, bringing the smell of alcohol closer. "What did you say to me?" Derek growled, his voice dangerous. "I said, I hope you're not consuming alcohol while operating this aircraft." Devon stated clearly, his tone the same one he used in boardrooms when delivering non-negotiable ultimatums. "You are accusing a senior captain of CloudLine Airways of drinking on duty." Derek's face was turning purple with rage. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you understand what you're implying?" "I know you're Derek Martinez," Devon said calmly. "And I know that federal aviation regulations prohibit consuming alcohol within 8 hours of flight duty and absolutely forbid alcohol consumption during flight operations. I also know that CloudLine Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for flight crew alcohol use." The specificity of Devon's knowledge clearly rattled Derek. Most passengers might know that pilots shouldn't drink, but they wouldn't know the exact regulations or company policies. Derek's eyes narrowed as he tried to figure out who exactly he was dealing with. "It's iced tea, you paranoid," Derek started to shout, then caught himself slamming the plastic cup down on the galley counter hard enough to make the ice rattle. "This is harassment of a flight crew member." "Victoria, call security." "You heard the captain," Victoria yelled, grabbing the intercom phone with theatrical urgency. "Emma, get the restraint kit. We have a passenger interfering with flight operations and threatening crew members." "I'm not threatening anyone," Devon said, raising his hands in a gesture of non-aggression. "I'm expressing a legitimate safety concern about potential impairment of flight crew." "Sit down immediately." Derek barked his captain's authority, filling his voice, "or I will declare an emergency divert this aircraft to Denver, and have the FBI drag you off in handcuffs." Emma appeared at the galley entrance looking terrified and confused, holding a canvas bag that contained the aircraft's passenger restraint system, zip-tie handcuffs and ankle restraints designed for unruly passengers. "What's happening?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. "Victoria, what should I-1A is interfering with flight crew duties?" Victoria announced loudly, her voice carrying into the passenger cabin where curious faces were beginning to peer through the curtain. "He's making false accusations against Captain Martinez and refusing to follow crew instructions." "I'm doing no such thing," Devon said, his voice still completely calm despite being surrounded by 3 increasingly hostile crew members in a space barely large enough for one person. "I observed what appeared to be alcohol consumption by flight crew and expressed a safety concern. That's not interference. That's responsible passenger behavior." Senator Walsh's voice came from just outside the galley. "Is everything all right back there? Do we have a security situation?" "Nothing to worry about." Senator Derrick called out, his voice switching to reassuring captain mode. "Just dealing with an unruly passenger. We'll have it resolved momentarily." Devon looked at the 3 crew members surrounding him. Emma looked frightened and confused, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but afraid to contradict her superiors. Victoria looked triumphant, like someone who had finally trapped a mouse she'd been chasing. Derrick looked guilty and defensive, like a man who knew he'd been caught, but was determined to fight his way out. "I'd like to see the contents of that cup," Devon said quietly. "That is it." Derrick exploded. "Victoria, restrain this passenger immediately. I'm declaring a security emergency and notifying ground control. This man is a threat to flight safety." The irony was staggering. A potentially intoxicated pilot declaring a passenger a threat to flight safety for questioning his sobriety. But Devon had seen enough. He had witnessed the drinking, documented the discrimination, and now watched as they doubled down on their misconduct by attempting to use federal security protocols to silence legitimate safety concerns. Devon nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Okay," he said simply. "I'll return to my seat." He turned and walked back to 1A, settling into his seat and calmly buckling his seatbelt. Senator Walsh leaned over from 2A, his voice low and concerned. "Son, you've got more courage than sense," the senator whispered. "But they're going to crucify you when we land. I've seen this before. Crew closes ranks. Passenger gets blamed for everything." "We'll see," Devon replied quietly. He opened his laptop and connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, typing an encrypted message to his security team and legal department. The email was brief but comprehensive. "Flight 847. Document everything. Captain Martinez observed consuming alcohol during flight operations. Crew attempting to use restraints to silence safety concerns. Have Port Authority police meet aircraft with breathalyzer equipment. Contact Elena immediately. Termination protocols now in effect. This has gone from discrimination to criminal endangerment. Time to clean house. DA." As he typed, he could hear Victoria on the intercom speaking to the cockpit Captain Martinez to the flight deck. "We have a security situation that requires your attention." Derrick's voice came over the passenger address system moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a minor incident with an unruly passenger that has been resolved. Local authorities will be meeting our aircraft upon arrival in Los Angeles to ensure everyone's safety and security. We apologize for any concern this may have caused." The cabin buzzed with nervous energy. Passengers whispered among themselves, many pulling out phones to text loved ones or post about the drama unfolding at 30,000 feet. Michael Chen was live tweeting the entire incident, his thread now approaching 100,000 views and climbing rapidly. The hashtag CloudLine Crisis was trending nationally, with thousands of people sharing their own airline horror stories and demanding accountability. Devon closed his laptop and settled back in his seat. In 3 hours, they would land in Los Angeles. In 3 hours, Derek Martinez and Victoria Sterling would discover that the man they had just tried to have arrested was actually their new boss. And in 3 hours, accountability would finally catch up with people who had spent years avoiding consequences for their actions. The most expensive silence in aviation history was about to get very loud. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted dramatically. What started as routine discrimination had escalated into something much darker. Crew members using federal security protocols to silence a passenger who had witnessed potential criminal behavior. The other passengers were no longer just uncomfortable observers. They were becoming active participants in a drama that none of them had expected. Senator James Walsh unbuckled his seatbelt and moved to the seat beside Devon. At 67, Walsh had spent 4 decades in politics, and he recognized power plays when he saw them. What he was witnessing wasn't standard crew discipline. It was abuse of authority. Son Walsh said quietly, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone who had spent years in Senate hearings. "I don't know what your background is, but what just happened back there was not normal crew behavior. I've flown commercial for 30 years, and I've never seen a captain that defensive about a simple question." Devon looked at the senator, studying his face. Walsh had kind eyes and the weathered features of someone who had spent decades fighting battles for people who couldn't fight for themselves. "The captain was drinking," Devon said simply. "Not speculation, not assumption. I saw him consume alcohol from a plastic cup while on duty." Walsh's expression darkened. "That's not just against regulations. That's criminal. Captain Martinez is responsible for 300 lives, and if he's impaired—" The senator trailed off the implications, too serious to voice casually. "I documented everything," Devon said quietly, "but they're going to claim I was disruptive, threatening, maybe even violent. By the time we land, the narrative will be that I'm an unruly passenger who made false accusations against heroic crew members." From across the aisle, Michael Chen looked up from his phone. The tech blogger had been frantically updating his Twitter thread, and his latest posts were gaining traction at an unprecedented rate. "It's not just their word against yours anymore," Michael said, holding up his phone. "I've been documenting this entire flight. The discrimination, the meal service, the galley confrontation. I got audio of most of it. And it's going viral." Michael's thread had exploded beyond his usual tech audience. #CloudLine Crisis was now trending nationally, with major news outlets beginning to pick up the story. Celebrities were retweeting it. Civil rights organizations were demanding investigations. And CloudLine's corporate Twitter account was being bombarded with angry messages. Breaking at Michael Chen Tech documents apparent discrimination and crew misconduct on at CloudLine Air Flight 847. Video shows passenger denied service, allegedly threatened with restraints for questioning captain sobriety. Thread has 500,000 plus views and climbing. Victoria emerged from the galley, her face flushed with anger and something that might have been panic. She could see passengers whispering, pointing phones in her direction, and the energy of the cabin turning against her. This wasn't how these situations usually played out. Typically, passengers minded their own business and let crew handle problems however they saw fit. She grabbed the intercom phone and made an announcement that would prove to be a critical mistake. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that the earlier disturbance was handled according to all federal safety protocols. The passenger involved made several unfounded accusations against our flight crew and became increasingly agitated when asked to comply with safety instructions. Captain Martinez showed exceptional professionalism in de-escalating what could have been a dangerous situation. We appreciate your patience and understanding." The announcement was supposed to control the narrative, but it had the opposite effect. By publicly characterizing Devon as making unfounded accusations, Victoria had just opened herself and CloudLine Airways to potential defamation claims. By claiming the captain de-escalated the situation, she was implying Devon had been the aggressor, which contradicted what dozens of passengers had witnessed. Senator Walsh stood up, his political instincts kicking in. "Excuse me, Ms. Sterling," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I was present for the entire interaction, and your characterization of events is not accurate." The passenger in question was polite, calm, and raised what appeared to be legitimate safety concerns. "At no point did I observe threatening or aggressive behavior from him." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. The tech executive in 3F nodded vigorously. The elderly couple in row 4 whispered their support. Even passengers from economy who had witnessed parts of the confrontation were craning their necks to voice agreement. Victoria's face went pale. Having a United States senator publicly contradict her version of events was not part of any scenario she had imagined. "Senator, with respect, you may have misunderstood the situation," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Crew members are trained to recognize threatening behavior, and I understood perfectly." Walsh interrupted, his voice cutting through the cabin. "I observed discrimination, denial of service, and what appeared to be retaliation against a passenger for asking questions. What I did not observe was any behavior that would justify the crew's response." Michael Chen was recording this exchange, his phone capturing Senator Walsh's defense of Devon and Victoria's increasingly desperate attempts to control a situation that was spiraling completely out of her control. From the cockpit came the sound of Derek Martinez's voice over the radio, speaking to Air Traffic Control, Los Angeles Center, CloudLine 847, requesting priority handling on arrival. "We have a Level 2 security situation with an unruly passenger. Request law enforcement meet aircraft at gate." Devon closed his eyes, listening to his own pilot, an employee of his company, filing what was essentially a false police report with federal authorities. Derek wasn't just risking his own career anymore. He was potentially committing a federal crime by knowingly providing false information about a security threat. Emma Rodriguez had been watching this entire drama unfold with growing horror. At 24, she had taken this job because she believed in service, in making people's travel experiences better, in being part of something positive. What she was witnessing was everything she had hoped never to be associated with. She walked quietly to Devon's row, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I want you to know that not everyone agrees with what's happening. What I saw in the galley, Captain Martinez was definitely drinking, and the way Ms. Sterling has treated you from the moment you boarded, it's not right. It's not who we're supposed to be." Devon looked at the young woman, seeing in her face the kind of employee he wanted CloudLine Airways to attract and keep. People who understood that service meant treating every passenger with dignity and respect. "Thank you, Emma," he said quietly. "Your integrity means more than you know. Don't let this experience change who you are or what you believe service should be." Victoria had overheard this exchange, and her expression shifted to pure fury. Emma had just broken the cardinal rule of airline crew dynamics: never side with a passenger against your colleagues, especially in front of other passengers. "Emma," Victoria barked. "Galley. Now." As Emma reluctantly walked toward the front of the aircraft, Victoria followed her, and their heated whispered conversation was clearly visible to everyone in first class. Other passengers were openly filming now, no longer pretending to be discreet. The situation had moved far beyond a simple service dispute. It had become a public accountability moment playing out in real time at 30,000 feet. Devon opened his laptop one final time, typing a message that would change everything. "Elena. Accelerate timeline. Contact Port Authority Police, FBI, and FAA. Captain Martinez has filed false report claiming passenger security threat to cover alcohol consumption during flight. Have breathalyzer and video analysis teams meet aircraft. Also contact PR team. This is about to go very public very fast. We're not just firing bad employees anymore. We're rebuilding an entire company culture. And it starts the moment we touch down in Los Angeles." As Devon typed, He could feel the eyes of his fellow passengers on him. They didn't know who he was, but they recognized something in his calm confidence in the way he handled pressure, in the certainty with which he documented everything happening around him. Senator Walsh leaned over one more time. "Son, I don't know what's going to happen when we land, but you've got at least 50 witnesses who saw what really occurred on this flight. That crew may have the uniforms, but you've got the truth. And in my experience, the truth has a way of winning eventually." Devon smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown since boarding the aircraft. "Senator," he said quietly, "I have a feeling the truth is going to win a lot faster than you think." 3 hours to Los Angeles. 3 hours until the most expensive reckoning in CloudLine Airways history. 3 hours until Victoria Sterling and Derek Martinez discovered that underestimating the man in the hoodie was about to cost them everything they had spent years building. The plane flew on through the night sky, carrying its cargo of passengers, crew, and consequences toward a confrontation that none of them would ever forget. As Flight 847 continued its westward journey through the night sky, Devon Alexander sat in Seat 1. Conducting the most important performance review in CloudLine Airways history. His laptop screen glowed softly in the darkened cabin, displaying documents that would reshape the entire company before they touched down in Los Angeles. With administrative access to CloudLine's complete personnel database, Devon began excavating the buried complaints and covered-up incidents that had allowed people like Victoria Sterling and Derek Martinez to operate with impunity for years. Each file he opened revealed another layer of institutional failure, another example of management choosing convenience over accountability. Victoria Sterling's complete employment record painted a disturbing picture. 15 years of service, multiple commendations for maintaining first-class standards, but buried beneath the official accolades were the real stories. 17 passenger complaints over 5 years, each one following the same pattern. Passengers reporting feeling unwelcome, being denied standard services, or experiencing what they described as racially motivated treatment. The most damning detail was how these complaints had been handled. Instead of investigation or corrective action, they had been systematically dismissed by middle management as passenger misunderstandings or unruly behavior. The base manager who had signed off on these dismissals, Paul Rodriguez, had a note in Victoria's file praising her for protecting the first-class experience from inappropriate passengers. Devon made a note to review Rodriguez's personnel file as soon as they landed. This kind of institutional cover-up didn't happen without management participation. Derek Martinez's file was equally revealing, but in a different way. 30 years of flying an exemplary safety record, but 2 incidents in the past 3 years involving off-duty conduct that had been resolved through union negotiations rather than disciplinary action. The details were deliberately vague, corporate legal language designed to obscure rather than illuminate. But Devon's experience reading between bureaucratic lines told him exactly what kind of behavior they were describing. More concerning was a pattern of complaints from junior flight attendants about Captain Martinez's behavior during flights. Terms like unprofessional conduct, inappropriate comments, and creating hostile work environment appeared repeatedly, but each complaint had been quietly resolved with transfers, settlements, or simply buried in personnel files. Devon pulled up the flight operations manual cross-referencing the alcohol policies that Derek had claimed to know. CloudLine's policy was crystal clear: 0 tolerance for alcohol consumption within 12 hours of duty time and absolutely no alcohol during flight operations. The penalty for violation was immediate termination and report to federal authorities. As he researched, his phone buzzed continuously with notifications from Michael Chen's viral Twitter thread. The hashtag CloudLine Crisis was now trending in multiple countries, with major news outlets picking up the story. CNN had posted a breaking news alert about alleged discrimination and safety violations on commercial flight. The Washington Post was already working on a deeper investigation into CloudLine's complaint handling procedures. Devon opened a secure messaging app and typed a message to Elena Vasquez, his newly appointed VP of Human Resources. Elena, expedite all termination paperwork. Both Sterling and Martinez have extensive disciplinary histories that were covered up by management. Recommend immediate review of Paul Rodriguez and entire LAX crew management structure. This isn't just about two bad employees, it's about a culture that protected and enabled them. Full house cleaning required. Elena's response came back within minutes, already in motion. Legal team reviewing video evidence from cabin surveillance. Port Authority coordinating with FBI for potential federal charges related to false security report. Medical examiner standing by with breathalyzer equipment. Press conference scheduled for 2 hours post-landing. This is going to be Big Devon. Devon closed the personnel files and opened CloudLine's passenger manifest for Flight 847. His own reservation showed a telling detail. Next to his name was a notation that read, "Cash upgrade. Verify legitimacy. Possible comp issue." Someone in reservations had flagged his ticket as potentially fraudulent simply because he had paid cash for first-class service. He pulled up the reservation system to see who had added that notation. The employee ID belonged to Sarah Mitchell, a reservations supervisor in Chicago. Devon made another note. The discrimination he was experiencing didn't begin with Victoria Sterling. It was built into the system from the moment he purchased his ticket. From the galley area came the sound of heated whispering. Victoria and Derek were clearly discussing strategy, trying to coordinate their version of events for the authorities waiting in Los Angeles. Devon could hear fragments of their conversation. Stick to the story. Unruly from the moment he boarded. Made threatening statements. Union will back us up. They were constructing a narrative designed to justify their behavior by portraying Devon as the aggressor. It was a calculated gamble based on the assumption that authorities would automatically believe uniformed crew members over a passenger, especially a black passenger who could be easily characterized as angry or threatening. Emma Rodriguez passed by his row carrying blankets for passengers who wanted to sleep. She paused, her voice barely audible. "Sir, I want you to know that I've been working for CloudLine for 8 months, and this isn't normal. Most of us really do care about treating passengers well. What happened today, it's not who we want to be." Devon looked at the young woman, seeing both her integrity and her fear. Emma was risking her job by even speaking to him, let alone expressing support, but she was doing it because her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. "Emma," he said quietly, "companies are made up of people like you. The challenge is creating an environment where people like you can speak up without fear, and people who abuse their authority face consequences. That's about to change." Emma's eyes widened slightly at something in his tone, a certainty that suggested he knew more about changing company cultures than most passengers would. She nodded and moved on, but Devon could see her processing what he had said. Devon opened one final file, CloudLine Airways financial performance over the past 2 years. Customer satisfaction scores had been declining steadily, with crew attitude and discriminatory treatment being the most common complaints in exit surveys. The company was hemorrhaging passengers to competitors who offered better service experiences. But the most interesting data was in the demographic breakdown of complaints. Passengers of color, passengers traveling alone, and passengers who appeared casual rather than business formal were reporting negative experiences at rates significantly higher than other demographics. The pattern was unmistakable and legally actionable. Devon closed his laptop and leaned back in his seat. In less than 2 hours, they would land in Los Angeles. In less than 2 hours, Victoria Sterling and Derek Martinez would discover that the passenger they had tried to humiliate and intimidate was actually the person who now owned their jobs, their futures, and their ability to continue working in aviation. But more than that, they were about to learn that actions have consequences, that power structures that protect bad behavior can be dismantled, and that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who will change your entire world. The plane flew on through the darkness, carrying them all toward a reckoning that had been years in the making. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom as Flight 847 began its descent toward Los Angeles International Airport. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial approach to LAX. Current weather is clear temperature 72 degrees, and we should be at the gate in approximately 20 minutes. But Derek Martinez's tone carried an edge that seasoned travelers recognized. The clipped professionalism of a pilot dealing with stress beyond normal flight operations. In the cockpit, Derek was coordinating with ground control for what he believed would be his vindication and Devon Alexander's downfall. Los Angeles Tower, CloudLine, 847, requesting expedited taxi and gate assignment. Derek's voice transmitted to air traffic control. We have a Level 2 passenger security situation requiring law enforcement assistance upon arrival. What Derek didn't know was that his radio transmissions were being monitored, not just by air traffic control, but by a legal team representing the new owner of CloudLine Airways. Every word he spoke was being documented as evidence in what would become the most expensive wrongful termination defense in airline industry history. In the cabin, Victoria Sterling moved through the first-class section with barely contained excitement. She had spent the past hour imagining Devon being led away in handcuffs, validating her judgment that he didn't belong in her cabin. She paused at Devon's row, unable to resist one final provocation. "I hope you enjoyed your flight," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The welcoming committee in Los Angeles is very thorough. They don't like passengers who make false accusations against dedicated crew members. Devon looked up at her calmly. "Ms. Sterling, I want you to remember this moment. Remember exactly how confident you feel right now. Remember how certain you are that you've won this confrontation." There was something in his tone that made Victoria's smile falter slightly, but she recovered quickly. She made an exaggerated handcuff gesture with her wrists, ensuring other passengers could see her mockery. "Tick-tock," she said, walking away with theatrical swagger. Devon pulled out his phone and typed a final message. "Elena, status report on ground team assembly." The response was immediate. Port Authority Police briefed on situation. FBI liaison present due to false federal security report. Medical examiner with breathalyzer equipment standing by. Legal team positioned. Media management ready. All termination paperwork executed and notarized. You own this company as of midnight. Time to act like it. Senator Walsh leaned over from 2A, his expression concerned. "Son, I've been thinking about this situation all flight. I'm going to stick around after we land, make sure you have a witness to whatever happens next. What you've endured today isn't just about bad service. It's about human dignity." Michael Chen was typing furiously on his phone, preparing what he knew would be the most important thread of his career. His followers had grown by 50,000 during the flight, and #CloudLine Crisis was trending globally. Major news outlets were already calling his agent, requesting exclusive interviews about the viral discrimination incident. Emma Rodriguez sat in her jump seat, internally wrestling with what she had witnessed. In 8 months with CloudLine, she had never seen crew members behave with such obvious cruelty. She had entered the airline industry believing in service, in making people's journeys better, in being part of something positive. What she had witnessed today was the opposite of everything she thought her uniform represented. As the plane descended through the clouds surrounding Los Angeles, the city lights spread out below like a circuit board. Devon opened his laptop one last time. He pulled up a document he had prepared weeks earlier, a comprehensive restructuring plan for CloudLine Airways that would transform it from a traditional carrier into the most passenger-friendly airline in North America. The plan included profit sharing for all employees, bias training for customer-facing staff, a customer advocate program that would investigate complaints independently, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Devon had originally planned to implement these changes gradually over months. That timeline had just accelerated to hours. The landing was unnecessarily rough. Derek slammed the Boeing 777 onto the runway with enough force to rattle the overhead bins and wake passengers who had been sleeping. It felt aggressive personal, like a pilot taking his anger out on the aircraft and everyone aboard. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Victoria made one final announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. Local authorities will be boarding the aircraft to assist with a passenger situation. We appreciate your patience during this process." The cabin buzzed with nervous energy. Passengers whispered among themselves, many pulling out phones to record what they expected to be Devon's arrest. Others, particularly those who had witnessed the crew's behavior firsthand, looked troubled and uncertain about what they were about to witness. Devon unbuckled his seatbelt as the engines wound down and the seatbelt sign chimed off. He stood calmly, retrieving his messenger bag, the same bag Victoria had claimed was too large for the overhead bin, and put on his jacket. Well, he said to Senator Walsh, "It's showtime." The aircraft door opened with its familiar hydraulic hiss, and two Port Authority police officers stepped into the first-class cabin. They were large, serious men in crisp uniforms, their presence immediately commanding attention from every passenger. Behind them, the jet bridge was crowded with what looked like a small army of people in expensive suits. Victoria Sterling rushed toward the officers, her voice high-pitched with excitement and vindication. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. That's him right there." She pointed dramatically at Devon, who stood calmly beside his seat. Seat 1A. "He threatened Captain Martinez, made false accusations, and became increasingly aggressive when we tried to maintain order. He's been disruptive from the moment he boarded." The first officer, a veteran with 20 years of airport security experience, looked at Devon with professional assessment. What he saw didn't match the description he'd been given. No signs of agitation, no threatening posture, just a well-dressed man standing quietly with his hands visible. "Sir," the officer said to Devon, "we're going to need you to come with us into the terminal so we can sort this situation out." "Gladly," Devon replied, his voice carrying none of the resistance or hostility that would characterize an actually unruly passenger. "I think there are several things that need sorting out." Victoria's smile was triumphant as she followed the group toward the aircraft door. Captain Derek Martinez emerged from the cockpit, his captain's hat tucked under his arm, looking every inch the professional pilot who had heroically dealt with a difficult situation. "Good work, officers," Derek said loudly, ensuring passengers could hear him. "Guy's been a problem since Chicago. Accused me of drinking, if you can believe that. Made threats, caused a disturbance. I've been flying for 30 years, and I've never seen behavior like this." They stepped into the jet bridge, but instead of heading toward a security office or police cruiser, the group stopped. Waiting in the jet bridge wasn't just law enforcement. There was an entire corporate reception committee. 6 people in expensive suits stood in formation holding briefcases and tablets. In the center was a woman with sharp glasses and silver hair, Elena Vasquez, CloudLine's VP of Human Resources. Beside her stood the chief legal officer, the head of operations, and a man in a white medical coat holding a small kit. At the back of the group, 2 men with badges and serious expressions identified them as FBI agents present, because false federal security reports fell under their jurisdiction. "What's all this?" Derek asked, his confident expression beginning to falter. "Who are these people?" Elena stepped forward, but she didn't look at Derek or Victoria. Her attention was focused entirely on Devon, and when she spoke, her voice carried the respectful tone reserved for addressing someone very important. "Mr. Alexander, she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to Los Angeles. I'm Elena Vasquez, VP of Human Resources for CloudLine Airways. I apologize for the circumstances of this meeting, and I want to assure you that we're prepared to address this situation immediately and comprehensively." Victoria's face went blank with confusion. "Mr. Who?" "Elena, what are you doing here? This is the passenger who—" Elena held up her hand, silencing Victoria without looking at her. "Do you have the documentation ready?" Devon asked. "Yes, sir," Elena replied, her tone businesslike and efficient. "Everything is prepared exactly as you requested." Derek was looking back and forth between Devon and Elena, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "Elena, this is the guy who threatened me. Who is he? Why are you—" Devon took off his sunglasses and looked directly at Derek Martinez. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that seemed to drop the temperature in the jet bridge by 10 degrees. Captain Martinez Devon said his words precise and deliberate. "My name is Devon Alexander. I am the CEO of Meridian Holdings." He paused, letting that information sink in. Meridian Holdings completed the acquisition of CloudLine Airways 72 hours ago. As of midnight last night, I own this aircraft, this gate, this terminal space, and until approximately 30 seconds ago, I owned your employment contract. The blood drained from Derek's face so rapidly that he swayed on his feet. "Meridian Holdings," he whispered. But the acquisition was finalized on Tuesday." Devon continued. "I've spent the past week in London completing the legal frameworks. This flight was my first experience as a customer of the airline I now own." He gestured toward the officers. "Officers, thank you for your prompt response. However, the security situation reported by Captain Martinez was fabricated to cover up safety violations that I personally witnessed." Victoria was staggering backward, her face pale with shock. "No, that's not— You're lying. You're in a hoodie. You can't be." "Ms. Sterling Devon said, turning his attention to her, your assumption that clothing determines worth is exactly the problem we're going to solve." He looked at Elena. "Do you have the breathalyzer equipment?" Elena nodded to the man in the white coat. "Dr. Reynolds, please administer the test." Derek's panic was immediate and complete. "You can't do this. Union rules. I need representation. This is harassment," Captain Devon said calmly. "Refusal to submit to a breathalyzer test after being observed consuming alcohol during flight operations constitutes immediate termination and automatic report to the FAA for license revocation." He cited the regulation from memory. "You can take the test and prove that what I saw was iced tea, or you can refuse and confirm that it wasn't." The FBI agents stepped forward. "Captain Martinez, we also need to discuss the false security report you filed with federal authorities. Making knowingly false statements about passenger threats is a federal crime." Derek looked at the breathalyzer device, then at the FBI agents, then at Devon. He was trapped in a web of his own making, and everyone present could see him calculating whether the alcohol would still show in his system. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I need to call my lawyer." "That's a refusal," Devon said. Elena stepped forward with a thick envelope. "Derek Martinez." Elena announced formally, "Your employment with CloudLine Airways is terminated immediately for cause. Violation of federal aviation regulations, filing false police reports, and gross misconduct endangering passenger safety." She handed him the envelope. "Your final paycheck minus deductions for training costs and uniform return will be processed according to company policy." Derek stared at the envelope in his hands, 28 years of seniority, and a captain's salary gone in 20 seconds. "You can't do this," he said weakly. "I've been here since before you were born." "I just did," Devon replied. "And Captain, the breathalyzer refusal will be reported to the FAA within the hour. Your commercial pilot's license will be under review by morning." Victoria was trembling now, tears starting to streak her makeup. The confident, cruel flight attendant who had tormented Devon for 5 hours was gone, replaced by a woman who suddenly understood that actions have consequences. "Mr. Alexander," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, if I had known who you were—" Devon interrupted her with a look that could have frozen fire. "That is exactly the problem, Victoria. You treated me with contempt because you thought I was nobody. If you had known I was the owner, you would have been respectful. But respect shouldn't depend on someone's perceived status or wealth. Every passenger deserves the dignity you showed Senator Walsh." Elena handed Victoria her own envelope. "Victoria Sterling, you are terminated for gross misconduct, discrimination, violation of federal anti-harassment policies, and filing false statements with law enforcement." Victoria took the envelope with shaking hands. "But my pension, my benefits, I've been here 15 years. Gone," Devon said simply. "You'll also be hearing from our legal department regarding the false police report. That's a criminal offense that carries potential jail time." The Port Authority officers looked at Devon with new understanding. "Sir, do you want to press charges for the false report?" "That will be determined by our legal team," Devon replied. "But I want this incident fully documented. These aren't just employment issues. They're federal crimes that put passenger safety at risk." As word spread through the aircraft that the unruly passenger was actually the new owner of the airline, passengers began gathering at the aircraft door to watch the confrontation. Cell phone cameras captured every moment, and within minutes, videos of Victoria and Derek being terminated would be viral across social media. Senator Walsh approached Devon, extending his hand. "Mr. Alexander, I have to say this is the most impressive display of corporate accountability I've witnessed in 40 years of public service." Devon shook the senator's hand. "Senator, accountability only works if it's consistent and immediate. These two individuals put every passenger on this aircraft at risk, and they did it with the confidence that comes from years of facing no consequences." He turned back to Victoria and Derek, who stood in the ruins of their careers like survivors of a natural disaster. "Get them escorted from the terminal," Devon told security. "They're no longer CloudLine employees. They're trespassers." The jet bridge had transformed into an impromptu courtroom with Devon Alexander serving as judge-jury and the ultimate authority on consequences that should have been delivered years ago. But he wasn't finished. What Victoria and Derek had endured so far was just the immediate punishment. The real reckoning was about to begin. Dr. Reynolds, the medical examiner, approached Derek with professional determination. "Captain Martinez, despite your refusal to take a voluntary breathalyzer test, I'm authorized by federal aviation regulations to conduct an involuntary test if there's reasonable suspicion of impairment during flight operations." Derek backed against the jet bridge wall, his captain's authority completely evaporated. "You can't force me to take a test. I know my rights." One of the FBI agents stepped forward. "Actually, Captain, when you filed a false federal security report, you opened yourself up to criminal investigation. Part of that investigation includes determining whether impairment was a factor in your decision-making." He nodded to Dr. Reynolds. "Proceed with the test." The breathalyzer device beeped as Dr. Reynolds calibrated it. The sound echoed in the confined space like a countdown timer. Derek's hands were visibly shaking as he realized there was no escape from the consequences of his choices. "This is harassment," Derek said weakly, but his voice carried no conviction. 30 years of perfect service, and you're going to destroy my career over one incident." Devon stepped closer, his voice deadly calm. "Captain, this isn't about one incident. This is about a culture of impunity that you've operated within for years. Did you think no one would ever check the personnel files? The covered-up complaints, the incidents that were quietly resolved through union protection rather than accountability." Elena held up her tablet, reading from Derek's complete employment record. Captain Martinez, in the past 5 years, you've had 4 complaints from junior flight attendants about inappropriate conduct. 2 incidents involving suspected alcohol use that were buried by management, and a pattern of treating passengers differently based on their perceived social status. Derek's face went gray as the full scope of his exposure became clear. This wasn't just about today's flight. They had excavated everything. "The union will never let this stand," Derek said desperately. "We have contracts, procedures, grievance processes." Captain Devon interrupted. "Those contracts and procedures are with CloudLine Airways. I am CloudLine Airways, and the new management has a zero-tolerance policy for behavior that endangers passengers or creates hostile work environments." Dr. Reynolds held up the breathalyzer device. "Captain, blow into the tube or we'll note your refusal in the federal report." Derek looked around the jet bridge, at the FBI agents, at the corporate executives, at the passengers from the aircraft who were openly filming the confrontation. He was completely surrounded by the consequences of choices he had thought would never catch up with him. He took the breathalyzer device with trembling hands and blew into it. The digital display read 0.07. Dr. Reynolds looked at the reading and whistled softly. "Captain, the legal limit for operating an aircraft is 0.04. CloudLine policy, which you signed, requires 0.00. You're nearly twice the federal limit." The FBI agents immediately stepped forward. "Captain Martinez, you're under investigation for operating an aircraft while intoxicated, endangering the lives of 298 passengers and crew members." Derek slumped against the wall, his career not just over but potentially facing federal criminal charges that could result in years in prison. Victoria had been watching this unfold in growing horror, realizing that if they had investigated Derek this thoroughly, they had certainly investigated her as well. "Mr. Alexander," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I never knew about the drinking." "I was just following company policy about problem passengers," Victoria Devon said. "Cutting her off, you weren't following company policy. You were creating your own policy based on your personal prejudices." He gestured to Elena, who pulled up Victoria's file on her tablet. "Ms. Sterling Elena read 17 passenger complaints in 5 years, all involving differential treatment based on race-perceived economic status or appearance. Complaints that were systematically dismissed by management despite clear patterns of discriminatory behavior." Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She had always assumed those complaints had been properly buried, that her management support meant she was untouchable. "What's particularly interesting," Devon continued, "is the notation in your file from Paul Rodriguez, your base manager. He praised you for maintaining first-class standards by discouraging inappropriate passengers. That's coded language for discrimination, and it shows management was not just aware of your behavior but actively encouraging it." Michael Chen had been live-streaming this entire confrontation, and his viewer count had reached over 2 million people. The hashtag Devon Alexander was now trending globally, with people sharing their own stories of airline discrimination and corporate accountability. "This is bigger than just 2 bad employees," Michael narrated to his audience. "This is about corporate culture, about what happens when discrimination is not just tolerated, but rewarded." Senator Walsh addressed Devon directly. "Mr. Alexander, what you're doing here goes beyond corporate discipline. You're creating a public record of how institutions can change when leadership demands accountability." Devon nodded, but his attention was focused on Emma Rodriguez, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the group, clearly terrified that she might be next. Emma, Devon called, and the young woman jumped as if electrocuted. "Please step forward." Emma approached with obvious dread, her career seemingly about to end before it had truly begun. "Emma," Devon said, his voice gentle, "you were the only crew member on this aircraft who treated me with basic human dignity. You apologized when wine spilled on my clothes. You looked uncomfortable when your colleagues were mistreating me. You spoke up when you knew it could cost you your job." Emma nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Effective immediately, Devon announced you are promoted to senior flight attendant and enrolled in our management training program. CloudLine Airways needs people who understand that service means serving everyone with dignity and respect." Emma's expression shifted from terror to disbelief. "Sir, I don't understand. I'm only 8 months out of training." "Emma, Devon said character matters more than seniority. You showed character when it was difficult and dangerous. That's exactly the kind of person we want leading our cabin crews." The contrast was stark and intentional. Victoria, with 15 years of seniority, was being led away by security guards as a terminated employee facing potential criminal charges. Emma, with 8 months of experience, but the courage to do what was right, was being promoted to lead the cultural transformation of the entire company. As security guards began escorting Victoria and Derek toward the terminal exit, Devon made one final announcement that would be heard by millions through Michael's live stream. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today was the old CloudLine Airways, a company where discrimination was tolerated, where safety violations were covered up, and where employees who mistreated customers faced no consequences." He paused, looking directly into Michael's camera. "That company no longer exists. The new CloudLine Airways will be built on dignity, safety, and the radical idea that every passenger deserves respect regardless of their appearance, their background, or their perceived social status." The applause began with Senator Walsh and spread through the crowd of passengers and airport personnel who had gathered to witness this unprecedented display of corporate accountability. But Devon wasn't done yet. The firing of 2 bad employees was just the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the entire airline industry. Word of the confrontation spread through LAX Terminal 5 faster than a wildfire. Passengers from other flights, airport employees, and even people from nearby terminals began gathering around Gate 47A, drawn by the unprecedented scene of a company owner personally firing employees for discrimination and safety violations. Michael Chen's live stream had exploded beyond all expectations. His viewer count had reached 3.2 million people, with major news outlets picking up the feed and broadcasting it live. #Devon Alexander and #CloudLine Accountability were trending in 17 countries, with people sharing their own stories of airline mistreatment and demanding similar accountability from other carriers. This is at Michael Chen Tech, broadcasting live from LAX. Michael narrated to his massive audience, where we've just witnessed the most dramatic example of corporate accountability I've ever seen. Devon Alexander, CEO of Meridian Holdings, just personally fired a pilot and flight attendant for discriminating against him during a flight where he was traveling incognito as a regular passenger. The story had caught the attention of every major media outlet in America. CNN had dispatched a crew to LAX. The Wall Street Journal was already working on a profile of Devon Alexander's business philosophy. Social media was exploding with support for Devon and demands that other airlines implement similar policies. As Victoria Sterling was escorted past the crowd by security guards, someone in the crowd recognized her from Michael's stream and began filming her perp walk. Her face, streaked with mascara and twisted with humiliation, would become the face of workplace discrimination consequences across social media. "That's her," someone shouted. "That's the flight attendant who was so cruel to that passenger." Victoria tried to cover her face, but it was too late. Her image was already being shared millions of times across every social platform, with captions like, "Actions have consequences, and this is what accountability looks like." Derek Martinez's situation was even worse. As the FBI agents led him through the terminal, airport employees who recognized him whispered among themselves. A captain being arrested for flying under the influence was unprecedented, and word was already spreading through the aviation community that Derek Martinez's career wasn't just over. It was ending in criminal charges. 30 years, Derek muttered to one of the agents. 30 years of perfect service, and it's all gone because of one mistake. "Captain," the agent replied, "based on your employment file, this wasn't one mistake. This was a pattern of behavior that finally caught up with you." Back at the gate, Devon was addressing the growing crowd with the natural authority of someone who had spent his career in leadership roles. He had removed his hoodie, revealing a crisp white shirt that, combined with his confident bearing, made it impossible to mistake him for anything other than exactly what he was: a successful CEO who had just delivered a masterclass in executive accountability. "Ladies and gentlemen," Devon said, his voice carrying easily across the crowd. What happened on Flight 847 wasn't unusual. It was business as usual for too many airlines, too many companies, and too many industries where discrimination has been normalized and excused. The crowd was completely silent, hanging on his every word. But what happened in this terminal tonight? That was unusual. It was unusual because consequences were immediate, public, and proportional to the harm caused. It was unusual because the people responsible for creating a hostile environment faced real accountability rather than quiet transfers or buried complaints. Senator Walsh stepped forward, addressing the crowd with his political experience. "I've spent 40 years in public service, and I've never seen corporate leadership take personal responsibility for employee conduct the way Mr. Alexander has done tonight. This should be the standard, not the exception." Emma Rodriguez stood beside Devon, still processing her promotion from junior flight attendant to management track in a single day. She had gone from fearing for her job to being asked to help rebuild the entire company culture. Mr. Alexander, a reporter who had arrived with the CNN crew, called out, "What message do you want to send to other airlines and corporations about discrimination in customer service?" Devon looked directly into the news camera. "The message is simple. Your employees' behavior reflects your company's values. If you tolerate discrimination, you're promoting it. If you bury complaints instead of addressing them, you're enabling abuse. And if you think that's acceptable business practice, you're not just wrong. You're about to be irrelevant." He gestured toward Emma. This young woman showed more leadership in 8 months than some people show in 15 years. She understood that treating people with dignity isn't about following rules. It's about recognizing humanity. That's the foundation of the new CloudLine Airways. Michael Chen approached with his phone still streaming to millions. "Mr. Alexander, what would you say to people who think this response was too extreme for what appeared to be a service dispute?" Devon's expression hardened. "Michael, this wasn't a service dispute. A drunk pilot filed a false federal security report to cover up safety violations, while his crew systematically discriminated against a passenger based on race and appearance. That's not bad service. That's criminal behavior that endangered everyone on that aircraft." He looked directly into the camera. "To anyone who thinks accountability is extreme, I'd ask you to consider how you'd feel if your family member was on that flight with an intoxicated pilot, or if your child was treated the way I was treated simply because of how they looked." The crowd erupted in applause. People were filming with their phones, taking selfies with Devon, and sharing the moment across social media with messages of support and demands for similar accountability from other companies. But the most powerful moment came when a young black boy, maybe 8 years old, approached Devon with his father. The boy looked up at Devon with wide eyes and said, "Mister, my dad says you showed those mean people that they can't be mean just because someone looks different." Devon knelt down to the boy's eye level. "That's right, young man. And you remember this. It doesn't matter what anyone thinks about how you look or where you come from. What matters is how you treat people and how you stand up for what's right." As the crowd began to disperse and the immediate crisis management wound down, Devon realized that what had started as a routine flight had become something much larger, a public demonstration that discrimination has consequences, that power can be used for justice, and that sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person who will change everything. As the immediate drama of the termination subsided, Devon Alexander stood in the middle of LAX's Terminal 5, surrounded by passengers, media, and airport personnel who had witnessed the most public display of corporate accountability in recent memory. But for Devon, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a transformation that would reshape CloudLine Airways and send shockwaves through the entire airline industry. Elena Vasquez approached with a tablet displaying real-time social media analytics. Devon #CloudLine. Accountability is trending globally. We're getting thousands of messages from passengers sharing their own discrimination experiences and praising your response. But we're also getting inquiries from employees across the company asking what this means for them. Devon nodded, understanding that this moment required more than just discipline. It required vision. He gestured for Michael Chen to continue his live stream, recognizing that social media was now the most powerful platform for communicating directly with both employees and customers. "Michael, if I could use your platform for a moment," Devon said, "I'd like to address not just what happened today, but what's going to happen tomorrow." Michael immediately focused his camera on Devon, and his viewer count spiked to over 4 million people as word spread that the new CloudLine owner was about to make a major announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, passengers and employees of CloudLine Airways." Devon began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built companies from nothing into industry leaders. "Tonight you witnessed the end of one kind of airline culture and the beginning of another." He gestured toward the gate where Flight 847 sat, now being cleaned and prepared for its next journey under new management principles. Effective immediately, CloudLine Airways is implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in airline history. Every employee, from ground crew to executives, will participate in quarterly bias training designed not just to prevent discrimination, but to actively promote inclusive service. The crowd was completely silent, recognizing they were witnessing a historic moment in corporate responsibility. But training is just the beginning. Devon continued, "We're launching the CloudLine Customer Advocate Program, where every complaint will be investigated by an independent team with direct reporting to my office. No more buried complaints, no more protecting employees who mistreat customers, no more excusing discrimination as policy enforcement." Elena stepped forward with a prepared statement. "The Customer Advocate Program will be led by Emma Rodriguez, our newly promoted Director of Service Excellence. Emma will have authority to investigate any complaint and recommend immediate action, including termination for employees who violate our dignity standards." Emma looked overwhelmed but determined as she stepped into the spotlight. At 24, she was about to become the youngest executive in CloudLine's history, but her promotion had been earned through character rather than seniority. "I want every employee to understand," Emma said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, "that we're not just changing policies, we're changing culture. Service isn't about enforcing hierarchies or judging who belongs in first class. Service is about treating every passenger as if they were our own family members." Devon resumed his announcement, addressing the financial aspect that would make these changes sustainable. CloudLine Airways is also implementing industry-leading profit sharing for all employees. When our customer satisfaction scores improve, when our safety ratings excel, when our company succeeds, every employee from baggage handlers to pilots will share in that success. The implications were revolutionary. Most airlines treated employees as costs to be minimized rather than partners in success. Devon was proposing to make every employee a stakeholder in the company's reputation and performance. Michael Chen, still streaming live, asked the question. Millions were thinking, "Mr. Alexander, this represents a massive investment in employee compensation and training. How do you expect shareholders to react to these costs?" Devon smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression he'd shown all day. "Michael, these aren't costs. They're investments. Companies that treat employees well and customers with dignity don't just survive in competitive markets, they dominate them. We're not just changing CloudLine Airways, We're about to demonstrate that ethical business practices are also the most profitable business practices." He gestured toward his phone where notifications were streaming in constantly. "In the 3 hours since this story broke, we've received over 50,000 messages from people saying they want to fly CloudLine specifically because of how we handled this situation. That's not just social media buzz. That's market demand for corporate accountability." Elena pulled up financial projections on her tablet. "Our booking system has recorded a 400% increase in reservation inquiries since the live stream began. Passengers are specifically requesting CloudLine flights because they want to support a company that stands up against discrimination." Senator Walsh, who had remained to witness the corporate transformation, stepped forward with his political experience. "Mr. Alexander, in my 40 years of public service, I've seen many companies promise change after scandals. What makes CloudLine's commitment different?" Devon's answer was immediate and specific. "Senator, the difference is measurement and transparency. Every month, CloudLine will publish detailed customer satisfaction scores broken down by passenger demographics. If we're truly eliminating discriminatory service, the data will prove it. If we're not, the data will expose us." He turned back to the camera, addressing the millions watching around the world. "We're also launching Skywatch, a mobile platform that allows passengers to rate their service experience in real time and report discrimination incidents instantly. These reports will trigger immediate investigation and response, not bureaucratic delay." The technological innovation was as revolutionary as the policy changes. Skywatch would create real-time accountability that made it impossible for discriminatory behavior to be hidden or ignored. "But the most important change," Devon continued, "isn't about policies or technology. It's about recognition that every person who steps onto our aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived social status." As if orchestrated for dramatic effect, the crew for the next CloudLine flight began boarding the aircraft. A diverse group of professionals who would be working under completely new standards and expectations. Emma Rodriguez addressed this new crew directly. "Your job isn't just to ensure safety and comfort. It's to demonstrate that excellence in service means serving everyone excellently. You represent not just CloudLine Airways, but the principle that discrimination has no place in American business." The announcement concluded with Devon making a promise that would be remembered as either visionary leadership or corporate suicide, depending on CloudLine's ability to deliver. "Within 1 year, CloudLine Airways will have the highest customer satisfaction scores in the industry. Not because we've lowered our standards, but because we've raised our humanity." As the crowd began to disperse and the media crews packed up their equipment, Devon realized that what had started as a routine business trip had become the most important day of his career. He hadn't just fired 2 bad employees. He had publicly committed to rebuilding an entire corporate culture around dignity, accountability, and respect. The real test would come not in the headlines of tomorrow, but in the everyday interactions between CloudLine employees and passengers over the months and years ahead. But for tonight, the foundation had been laid for a transformation that would either revolutionize the airline industry or serve as a cautionary tale about the costs of corporate idealism. Either way, there was no going back. The old CloudLine Airways was dead, and what would rise from its ashes remained to be seen. The viral explosion that followed Devon Alexander's confrontation with Victoria Sterling and Derek Martinez became a textbook case study in how quickly social media can transform isolated incidents into global movements for accountability. Within 6 hours of Michael Chen's live stream ending, the story had reached every corner of the internet, and the consequences for the 2 former CloudLine employees began cascading in ways they never could have imagined. Victoria Sterling's original social media presence became ground zero for public fury. Her personal Instagram account, which had featured photos of her glamorous flight attendant lifestyle, first-class cabins, international destinations, and captions about maintaining standards in aviation, was flooded with thousands of comments from people who had witnessed her downfall. You got exactly what you deserved. Read one comment with 50,000 likes. Imagine thinking you could treat people like garbage and never face consequences. The book deal she had secured during her brief moment of viral fame was canceled within hours. The publisher released a statement after reviewing additional information about Ms. Sterling's conduct. We have determined that her story does not align with our editorial values. The $25,000 advance she had already received was demanded back money she had already spent on a luxury apartment lease and new wardrobe for her planned media tour. Her attempts to control the narrative through additional social media posts only made things worse. Every video she posted trying to explain her side was met with thousands of replies featuring clips from Michael Chen's livestream, showing her exact words and actions. The internet had receipts, and Victoria had no defense against her own recorded behavior. The apartment she couldn't afford was the first casualty. Within 3 weeks, she was evicted for non-payment, her belongings placed on the sidewalk, while paparazzi photographers captured her humiliation. The same news outlets that had featured her as a sympathetic figure now ran stories about her fall from grace, complete with before and after photos, showing her descent from confident flight attendant to unemployed pariah. Finding new employment proved impossible. The viral nature of her termination meant that any potential employer could Google her name and instantly find millions of search results detailing her discriminatory behavior. Service industry jobs, hotels, restaurants, retail stores, all turned her away the moment managers recognized her face. "We don't hire people who treat customers the way you treated that passenger," a restaurant manager in Beverly Hills told her the rejection captured by a customer's phone and shared across TikTok. "Our business depends on making people feel welcome, not judged." Victoria was forced to move back into her childhood bedroom in her parents' house in Riverside, California. At 38, she found herself exactly where she had been at 18, but with the added burden of being one of the most recognizable symbols of workplace discrimination in America. Derek Martinez's fall was even more spectacular because it involved federal criminal charges rather than just social humiliation. The breathalyzer results from LAX had been forwarded to the Federal Aviation Administration, the FBI, and the Department of Transportation, triggering multiple investigations that would destroy not just his career, but his freedom. The FAA moved first, revoking his commercial pilot's license permanently within 72 hours of the incident. His 30-year career was erased with a single letter that would be public record forever. The revocation wasn't just for the alcohol violation. It included citations for filing false federal security reports and creating dangerous conditions that endangered passenger safety. His union, which Derek had expected to protect him instead, issued a public statement distancing themselves from his conduct. The Airline Pilots Association does not condone alcohol use during flight operations or discriminatory treatment of passengers. Captain Martinez's behavior does not represent the professionalism we expect from our members. The federal criminal charges came next. The FBI investigation revealed that Derek had knowingly filed false reports about Devon being a security threat, a federal crime that carried potential prison time. The alcohol violation during flight operations was charged as a separate federal offense, with prosecutors arguing that Derek had endangered 298 lives through his impairment. Derek's wife of 25 years, humiliated by the public scandal and learning about behavior she had never suspected, filed for divorce and demanded half of everything they had built together. The house went on the market immediately, with real estate agents noting that they had to disclose the property's connection to the viral airline discrimination case to potential buyers. At 55, Derek found himself unemployable in aviation and facing federal criminal trials that could result in years in prison. He moved into a budget motel near LAX, the same type of cheap accommodation he had used during layovers 30 years earlier as a junior pilot, but this time with no prospects for advancement, no career to return to, and no hope of rebuilding what he had destroyed in a single day. The media coverage was relentless. Derek's booking photo became a meme across social platforms with captions like, when keeping it real goes wrong, and this is what drunk power looks like. Aviation blogs analyzed his career, finding patterns of complaints and incidents that had been buried by union protection and management indifference. The broader consequences rippled through the entire airline industry. Other carriers began reviewing their own complaint records, terrified of having their own CloudLine moment, where years of ignored discrimination would be exposed in a viral incident. Employee training programs were hastily revised, complaint procedures were overhauled, and executives scrambled to implement policies that would prevent similar public relations disasters. Paul Rodriguez, the base manager, who had protected Victoria for years, was terminated within a week as Devon's investigation revealed the extent of management complicity in discriminatory practices. His personnel files showed that he had not just ignored complaints about Victoria's behavior, but had actively praised her for maintaining first-class standards through discriminatory service. The cultural impact extended far beyond CloudLine Airways. The incident became required viewing in business schools, customer service training programs, and diversity workshops across America. Devon Alexander's calm, methodical response to discrimination was contrasted with Victoria and Derek's defensive, ultimately self-destructive behavior. #CloudLine. Accountability became more than a hashtag. It became shorthand for immediate public consequences for discriminatory behavior. Other viral incidents in restaurants, hotels, and retail stores were measured against the CloudLine standard, with social media users demanding that other companies respond with similar decisiveness. Victoria Sterling and Derek Martinez had become cautionary tales, their names permanently associated with the costs of treating people as less than human. Their downfall wasn't just professional or financial, it was complete social exile from the communities and industries they had once dominated. But perhaps the most bitter irony was that their behavior had catalyzed exactly the kind of change they had spent years resisting. Devon Alexander's transformation of CloudLine Airways into an industry leader in inclusive service was built on the foundation of their failures, turning their worst instincts into his company's greatest strengths. They had thought they were protecting their positions by excluding people who didn't meet their arbitrary standards. Instead, they had created the exact conditions that would eliminate their positions entirely and elevate people like Emma Rodriguez, who understood that true professionalism meant treating everyone with dignity. The moral of their story spread far beyond aviation. In an age of cameras and accountability, treating people as less than human doesn't just hurt them, it destroys you. While Victoria Sterling and Derek Martinez watched their careers disintegrate in real time across social media, Emma Rodriguez was experiencing the opposite trajectory, a meteoric rise that transformed her from a junior flight attendant into one of the most influential voices in customer service excellence. Devon Alexander's decision to promote Emma wasn't just about rewarding individual character. It was about demonstrating that companies could identify and elevate employees who embodied their values, rather than simply inheriting the legacy of those who had failed them. Emma's promotion became a symbol of merit-based advancement that resonated far beyond the airline industry. Within her first month as Director of Service Excellence, Emma had redesigned CloudLine's entire training curriculum around what she called Dignity First Service. The program was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of teaching employees to categorize passengers by status or appearance, it taught them to recognize the humanity in every interaction. "We don't serve first-class passengers and economy passengers," Emma explained in a training video that went viral across LinkedIn and professional development platforms. "We serve human beings who have chosen to trust us with their safety and their time. Some of them paid more for additional amenities, but all of them deserve our respect and professionalism." The training program Emma developed became the industry standard almost overnight. Other airlines began requesting licensing deals to use CloudLine's curriculum, recognizing that Emma had solved a problem the entire service industry had been struggling with for decades: how to create consistently excellent customer experiences across diverse employee populations. Emma's background, young Hispanic from a working-class family in East Los Angeles, resonated with frontline employees across the service sector who had felt excluded from traditional management tracks. Her success story became proof that companies could find leadership talent in unexpected places if they focused on character rather than credentials. The Emma Standard became CloudLine's unofficial motto, referring to the principle that every passenger should be treated with the same dignity Emma had shown Devon during his worst moment on Flight 847. Flight attendants began measuring their own performance against Emma's example. Would Emma handle it this way? Would Emma make this passenger feel welcome? CloudLine's customer satisfaction scores didn't just improve, they shattered industry records. Within 6 months of Emma's promotion, the airline had achieved the highest ratings in North American aviation history, with specific praise for consistently exceptional service across all cabin classes and passenger demographics. The financial impact was staggering. CloudLine's revenue increased by 35% in the first quarter after the incident, driven by passengers who specifically chose the airline because of its reputation for inclusive service. Business travelers, who had historically been the most vocal critics of airline customer service, became CloudLine's most enthusiastic advocates. "I fly CloudLine exclusively," now wrote a frequent business traveler in a review that received 100,000 likes on LinkedIn. "Not because of the planes or the routes, but because I never have to worry about being embarrassed by how they treat other passengers. Their professionalism makes me proud to be associated with them." The transformation extended far beyond customer interactions. Emma implemented employee satisfaction surveys that revealed years of internal discrimination and workplace harassment that had been as hidden as the passenger complaints. Flight attendants reported feeling empowered to speak up about inappropriate behavior from pilots and senior staff, knowing that complaints would be investigated rather than buried. The cultural change created a virtuous cycle. Happier employees provided better service, which attracted more customers, which generated more revenue, which funded better employee benefits, which attracted higher quality staff. CloudLine became known as the best place to work in the airline industry, with application rates increasing by 500% and employee turnover dropping to historic lows. Industry analysts began referring to the CloudLine effect, the phenomenon where companies implementing dignity-based service models saw immediate improvements in both customer satisfaction and employee retention. Business schools added Devon Alexander and Emma Rodriguez to their case studies of transformational leadership, contrasting their approach with traditional command and control management structures. Other airlines began poaching CloudLine employees not just for their skills, but for their training in inclusive service. Emma found herself consulting with carriers across North America, Europe, and Asia, all seeking to replicate CloudLine's success without experiencing their own discrimination scandal. The irony, Emma told a conference of airline executives in Chicago, is that treating people with dignity isn't innovative or revolutionary. It's basic human decency. The only reason it seems revolutionary is because so many companies have normalized treating customers as problems to be managed rather than people to be served. Her speech at that conference, titled "The Economics of Empathy," became one of the most watched presentations in airline industry history. Emma argued that inclusive service wasn't just morally correct. It was the most profitable business strategy available, because companies that made all customers feel welcome attracted more customers than companies that made some customers feel excluded. The ripple effects extended throughout the service economy. Hotels began implementing CloudLine standards for guest relations. Restaurants trained staff on dignity-first hospitality. Retail chains revised their customer service protocols to prevent the kind of discriminatory treatment that had destroyed Victoria Sterling's career. Emma Rodriguez, who had started as a nervous junior flight attendant worried about spilling wine, became a nationally recognized expert on service excellence and workplace transformation. Her LinkedIn profile, which had started with basic flight attendant credentials, now listed speaking engagements at Harvard Business School, consulting contracts with Fortune 500 companies, and invitations to testify before Congress about discrimination in customer service industries. but Emma never forgot the moment that changed her trajectory. Watching Devon Alexander maintain his dignity while being systematically mistreated by her colleagues. That memory informed every policy she created, every training session she led, and every employee she mentored. Character isn't about what you do when people are watching, she told new CloudLine employees during orientation. Character is about what you do when you think no one important is paying attention. Because you never know who's in seat 1A, and you never know when treating someone with dignity might change everything. The Skywatch platform that Devon Alexander had announced in the emotional aftermath of Flight 847 launched 3 months later to unprecedented success, but its impact extended far beyond customer feedback to become a revolutionary tool for corporate accountability across multiple industries. Initially designed as a simple passenger rating system for CloudLine Airways Skywatch, evolved into a comprehensive platform that allowed customers to report discrimination, track complaint resolution, and share experiences across all major service industries. Within 6 months of launch, the platform had expanded from airline reviews to include hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and rental car companies. The genius of Skywatch wasn't just in its technology, it was in its transparency. Unlike traditional complaint systems that disappeared into corporate bureaucracies, Skywatch made every report public, creating real-time accountability that companies couldn't ignore or bury. When a passenger reported discriminatory treatment, the report was immediately visible to other users, potential customers, and media outlets monitoring the platform. Skywatch didn't just change how companies handle complaints, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a business professor at Stanford, who studied the platform's impact. It changed how companies prevent complaints by making discrimination too expensive to ignore. When every incident of bias becomes a public relations crisis, companies have powerful incentives to train their employees properly. The platform's data analytics revealed patterns of discrimination that had been invisible when complaints were handled individually by different companies. Skywatch's algorithm could identify when specific employees' locations, or even entire companies, showed statistical patterns of treating customers differently based on demographics. CloudLine Airways became the platform's showcase success story. The airline's Skywatch scores improved dramatically, month over month, providing quantifiable proof that Devon's cultural transformation was working. Passengers could see not just CloudLine's overall ratings, but specific metrics about how passengers of different backgrounds rated their experiences. The transparency was terrifying at first, admitted Elena Vasquez, CloudLine's VP of Human Resources. We knew our scores would be public, our failures would be visible, and our competitors would see our weaknesses. But that fear motivated us to fix problems faster than we ever had before. Other airlines initially resisted joining Skywatch, viewing it as a competitive disadvantage that would expose their own discrimination issues. But customer demand forced their participation. Travelers began avoiding airlines that weren't on the platform, viewing their absence as evidence they had something to hide. The network effects were powerful. As more companies joined Skywatch, the platform became more valuable for customers seeking service providers with proven track records of inclusive treatment. Business travelers began making decisions based on Skywatch scores rather than traditional metrics like price or convenience. The platform's impact on employee behavior was immediate and dramatic. Service workers knew that every interaction could be rated publicly, creating accountability that traditional management oversight had never achieved. The platform didn't just catch bad behavior, it prevented it by making consequences immediate and public. Skywatch's success attracted acquisition offers from major tech companies, but Devon kept the platform independent, recognizing that its credibility depended on users trusting that their reports wouldn't be suppressed by corporate interests. Instead, he open-sourced key components of the technology, allowing other developers to create similar accountability tools for different industries. Discrimination thrives in darkness, Devon explained in a TED Talk about Skywatch's philosophy. When you make bias visible, measurable, and costly, it starts disappearing. Not because people suddenly become more enlightened, but because they understand that treating others poorly has immediate consequences for their reputation and livelihood. The platform's data began influencing policy discussions at federal and state levels. Legislators used Skywatch reports to identify patterns of discrimination in industries that received government contracts or operated in regulated sectors. The platform became an unofficial enforcement mechanism for civil rights laws that had historically been difficult to monitor and prosecute. By the one-year anniversary of Flight 847, Skywatch had recorded over 10 million user interactions, processed 500,000 service evaluations, and helped identify discriminatory practices at thousands of businesses across North America. More importantly, the platform had created a cultural shift where inclusive service became a competitive advantage, rather than just a legal requirement. The boy who had approached Devon at LAX asking why those mean people couldn't be mean to people who looked different was growing up in a world where such meanness carried immediate public and expensive consequences. Skywatch hadn't eliminated discrimination, but it had made it far more costly and far less sustainable than ever before in American business history. The Tuesday evening departure of CloudLine Flight 847 from Chicago O'Hare to Los Angeles had become something of a pilgrimage for passengers who understood its significance. Business travelers specifically booked this flight not for schedule convenience, but to experience the route that had become synonymous with corporate accountability and transformed customer service. Devon Alexander sat in seat 1A again, but this time his presence was planned rather than coincidental. Every month, he flew the same route as a regular passenger, monitoring the cultural transformation he had implemented and ensuring that the changes hadn't become mere corporate theater performed for management attention. The contrast with his previous journey was immediate and profound. As Devon boarded the aircraft, senior flight attendant Emma Rodriguez greeted him with the same genuine warmth she showed every passenger, not because she recognized him as the CEO, but because inclusive service had become so deeply embedded in CloudLine's culture that differential treatment based on appearance or perceived status had become unthinkable. "Welcome aboard, Flight 847, Emma said, her smile authentic and her manner professionally warm. "We're honored to have you flying with us today. Is there anything I can do to make your journey more comfortable?" The words were similar to what flight attendants had always said, but the sincerity behind them was revolutionary. Emma wasn't performing hospitality. She was embodying it, treating Devon exactly as she treated the college student in 3F, the elderly couple in 4D, and the business executive in 2A. The new captain, Maria Gonzalez, emerged from the cockpit for her pre-flight cabin walk, a practice that had been discontinued industry-wide after the Derek Martinez incident, then reinstated by airlines seeking to demonstrate transparency and professionalism. Captain Gonzalez was a 15-year veteran who had been promoted to captain ahead of schedule based on her exemplary safety record and her leadership during CloudLine's cultural transformation. "Mr. Alexander," she said, approaching his seat with professional respect. "I wanted to personally thank you for the changes you've implemented. Flying for CloudLine has become something I'm proud of, again, not just professionally, but personally." Her words carried weight because Captain Gonzalez had been one of dozens of CloudLine employees who had submitted confidential reports about workplace discrimination and safety concerns that had been ignored under previous management. Devon's transformation hadn't just changed how passengers were treated. It had created an environment where employees felt safe reporting problems rather than covering them up. The pre-flight service proceeded with clockwork precision, but more importantly with genuine care. Every passenger received the same attention, the same quality of service, and the same respect regardless of their appearance, age, or perceived social status. The college student received the same champagne service as the business executive. The elderly couple got the same meal options as the first-class regulars. Senator James Walsh, who had specifically chosen this flight for its anniversary significance, leaned over from 2A with a warm smile. "Devon, I have to tell you, I've flown this route dozens of times since our memorable journey, and the consistency is remarkable. This isn't just good training. This is cultural DNA." As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Devon opened his laptop and reviewed CloudLine's performance metrics. Customer satisfaction scores remained at industry record levels. Employee satisfaction had reached all-time highs. Revenue was up 40% year over year, driven by passengers who chose CloudLine specifically for its reputation for inclusive service. The company had become the most valuable airline brand in North America, not despite treating all customers equally, but because of it. The meal service that followed was a masterpiece of professional hospitality. Emma's team moved through the cabin with efficiency and warmth, ensuring every passenger felt attended to without being intrusive. When a passenger in economy asked for assistance with a laptop issue, the flight attendant spent several minutes helping him troubleshoot the problem. The kind of above-and-beyond service that had become standard rather than exceptional. Devon observed a young flight attendant training under Emma's mentorship, watching how she modeled inclusive service without making it seem like performance art. The trainee was learning that excellence in customer service wasn't about following scripts or procedures. It was about recognizing the humanity in every interaction and responding accordingly. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Devon reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had boarded this flight as an unknown passenger who happened to own the airline. Tonight, he was flying as proof that companies could transform themselves completely when leadership demanded accountability and employees were empowered to embody their values. The landing was smooth, professional, and routine. Exactly what air travel was supposed to be when crews focused on safety and service, rather than power games and discrimination. As passengers began deplaning, many stopped to thank the crew for excellent service, a practice that had become common on CloudLine flights, as passengers recognized they were experiencing something special. Devon remained in his seat until the last passenger had exited, not for dramatic effect, but out of respect for the journey that had brought him here and the responsibility he carried for ensuring it continued. The employee shuttle lot at Los Angeles International Airport was a sprawling maze of concrete and painted lines where thousands of airport workers parked their cars before beginning shifts that kept one of the world's busiest airports functioning. At 5:30 a.m. on a gray Tuesday morning, the lot was mostly empty except for early arrivals and overnight workers heading home. Derek Martinez sat behind the wheel of a weathered Honda Civic, wearing the blue uniform of LAX Ground Transportation Services. The uniform was a far cry from the crisp captain's stripes he had worn for 30 years, but it was the only aviation-related job he could find after his commercial pilot's license had been permanently revoked. His current position was driving the employee shuttle that transported airport workers from the remote parking lot to their terminals, a job that paid $18 an hour and required no background check beyond basic driving record verification. It was honest work, but for someone who had once commanded Boeing 777s across international routes, the psychological adjustment had been devastating. Derek's route took him past the CloudLine Airways maintenance hangar every morning, a daily reminder of the life he had lost through his own choices. But this morning was different. Through his windshield, he could see a sleek CloudLine 777 being prepared for an early departure, its engines gleaming under the pre-dawn floodlights. The aircraft represented everything Derek had once been, and everything he would never be again. But more than that, it represented the transformation of a company he had helped bring to its lowest point, now soaring to heights he had never achieved even during his best years as a captain. As Derek watched the ground crew performing their careful pre-flight inspection, he noticed the pride in their movements, the attention to detail, and the professional satisfaction that came from being part of something excellent. These workers were experiencing the job satisfaction that Derek had lost years before his termination when cynicism and entitlement had replaced the passion that had originally drawn him to aviation. A text message buzzed on his phone from his ex-wife's attorney reminding him about his monthly alimony payment and the ongoing negotiations about their remaining shared assets. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier, but the financial entanglements would continue for years. His pension had been frozen, his benefits terminated, and his reputation in the aviation community destroyed so completely that even former friends avoided returning his calls. Derek started the shuttle and pulled away from the hangar area, but not before catching sight of the aircraft's tail number, the same Boeing 777 that had been Flight 847, the plane that had changed his life forever. The aircraft looked identical from the outside, but Derek knew that everything about it was different now, from the crew training to the corporate culture to the leadership philosophy that guided every decision. As he drove toward the employee lot to begin his morning pickups, Derek passed a billboard advertising CloudLine Airways' newest marketing campaign, Excellence in Every Seat, Dignity in Every Journey. Emma Rodriguez's face was prominently featured in the advertisement, representing the kind of leadership that Derek had never understood or valued when he had the power to make a difference. The shuttle filled with early shift workers, baggage handlers, security officers, maintenance technicians, and gate agents heading to work at an airport where Derek had once been treated with automatic respect and deference. Now he was invisible to most of them, just another uniformed driver performing a necessary but unremarkable service. But as Derek drove through the tunnels and roadways of LAX, he realized something that surprised him for the first time in years. He felt no resentment toward the passengers in his shuttle. His anger had been replaced by something closer to acceptance, and occasionally, during quiet moments, something that might eventually become wisdom about the choices that had brought him to this place. 5 years after flight, 847 Devon Alexander stood before a joint session of Congress, testifying about the economic and social impact of corporate accountability in customer service industries. The hearing room was packed with business leaders, civil rights advocates, and policymakers who had gathered to understand how one airline's transformation had catalyzed changes across the entire American economy. Senators and representatives. Devon began his voice carrying the same calm authority that had commanded respect in that LAX jet bridge years earlier. What happened on Flight 847 wasn't unusual in its discrimination. It was unusual in its consequences. The difference wasn't the behavior we witnessed, but the accountability that followed. The CloudLine Airways transformation had become a Harvard Business School case study, a model replicated by companies across dozens of industries, and proof that treating all customers with dignity wasn't just morally correct, it was the most profitable business strategy available. Emma Rodriguez, now Vice President of Industry Relations for Meridian Holdings, sat in the gallery watching Devon's testimony. Her journey from junior flight attendant to corporate executive had inspired thousands of service industry workers to speak up against discrimination and demand better treatment from their employers. The Emma standard had become shorthand for servant leadership that elevated others rather than diminishing them. In the audience sat representatives from 12 countries studying American innovations in corporate accountability. Skywatch had expanded globally, creating transparency in customer service that had forced companies worldwide to examine their treatment of customers and employees. Discrimination hadn't been eliminated, but it had become exponentially more expensive and unsustainable. The lesson of Flight 847. Devon continued, isn't about airline service or individual bad actors. It's about institutional courage, the willingness of organizations to confront their own failures publicly and completely, rather than managing them quietly and temporarily. As Devon concluded his testimony, the hearing room erupted in sustained applause, but his mind drifted to a letter he had received the previous week from a young boy named Marcus, the same child who had approached him at LAX years earlier. Marcus, now 13, had written to tell Devon that he wanted to become a pilot someday, but more importantly, he wanted to be the kind of pilot who made everyone feel safe and welcome on his aircraft. You showed me that being powerful means using your power to help people, not hurt them, Marcus had written. That's the kind of man I want to be. Outside the Capitol building, reporters asked Devon about CloudLine's future plans and his advice for other business leaders facing discrimination scandals. Every day, in every customer interaction, we have a choice, Devon said, looking directly into the cameras that would carry his words around the world. We can choose to see people as problems to be managed or as human beings deserving dignity and respect. That choice determines not just our character, but our success. As Devon walked toward his car, he passed a CloudLine Airways advertisement on the side of a bus. Emma Rodriguez's picture smiled back at him with the caption, "Excellence isn't about where you sit. It's about how you treat everyone around you." The revolution that had begun with a hoodie and a boarding pass had become a movement that changed how America did business. And it all started with one simple principle: everyone deserves to be treated like they belong. Because in the end, they do. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, where you come from, or what others assume about you, remember this story. Your worth isn't determined by other people's prejudices. Stand tall, stay dignified, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong exactly where you are. Sometimes the person in the hoodie is the one signing the paychecks. But more importantly, sometimes standing up for what's right is worth more than any paycheck ever could be. Drop a comment below sharing your own story of overcoming assumptions or standing up for what's right. Hit subscribe if you believe that accountability and dignity should never be optional. And remember, respect isn't about status, it's about recognizing the humanity in everyone you meet. Because the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance, ask yourself, do you really know who you're talking to?